Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Jobin, and you are listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. This podcast is dedicated to helping family caregivers in Ontario. Through expert tips and resources, you will gain knowledge and validation for the ups and downs that come with caregiving. More importantly, you'll learn that you're not alone. It's so important to take this time for yourself. We're glad you're here. Today, we're joined by Dr. Heather Keller, a registered dietitian and professor in the Department of Kinesiology and Health Sciences at the University of Waterloo. She holds the Schlegel UW Research Chair in Nutrition and Aging. Dr. Keller's research focuses on improving food and fluid intake, as well as the overall mealtime experience for older adults. Her work spans the healthcare continuum, from screening for nutritional risks in the community to supporting older adults with dementia and their caregivers. She emphasizes the role of nutrition and shared meals in fostering connection and continuity. Dr. Keller, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Michelle, for having me.
This is such an important topic. And again, as I was telling you, I don't think we have addressed this yet in the show. What we put in our bodies. And I love the point about shared mealed experiences as well. So we'll dive into that a little bit deeper, but I know that this is a topic that will affect so many of our caregivers that
Right.
want to know more, that want to provide the best possible circumstance when it comes to nutrition for their loved ones. So let's chat, first of all, about understanding nutritional challenges in caregiving. Why is malnutrition such a significant issue in caregiving, and how can caregivers recognize the early signs?
Well, it's a great question. So, no matter what the condition is, if someone has a chronic disease that results in needing a caregiver, probably it's because they have challenges doing various activities of daily living, such as cooking and shopping and maybe even eating. And so, those challenges alone start to pose potential nutrition risk for older adults. In addition to that, though, the chronic disease, or if it's dementia, for example, has a host of other things often associated with it that can affect food intake, like poor appetite, medications that interfere with appetite, dry mouth, swallowing problems, chewing problems, those sorts of things. And with age, quite frankly, some of these things happen too. So we get a little bit weaker. Maybe our appetite decreases because we feel full quickly. And so then it leads to less food intake in general in older adults, and often less nutritious food intake, resulting eventually potentially in malnutrition. And so we know, for example, that in Canada, I've done some research around this with hospitals, that 1 in 2 to 1 in 3 persons coming into a hospital who's often an older adult will be malnourished on admission. And so the chronic conditions or the situation that got them into hospital has been part of the process of them becoming malnourished. And that malnutrition then can lead to some really negative outcomes, like staying longer in the hospital, perhaps having delirium, maybe their wounds are not going to heal post a surgery as well. They get infected. Maybe when they do get home, they don't eat well further and they might have a fall. So all of these things compound with malnutrition, unfortunately.
So, what would be some of the most common eating challenges that older adults face, and particularly when we're talking about older adults that might have dementia?
Yeah, so probably swallowing is one of the most
Mm.
common ones we see, right? Even from the early stages. But essentially, these eating challenges progress as the disease progresses as well. And so we see, 1 in 2 having a swallowing problem in the later stages of dementia. So other eating challenges might be wandering away from the meal. We call that wayfaring, or lacking attention, right, when it comes to eating. Maybe in the earlier stages, we're seeing things like they're not sure how to make a meal anymore, or they get challenges with trying to make something they used to make all the time and they get lost in the steps. So, how can we support them? Because that's going to be important to their continuity, as we already talked a little bit about the idea that who they are and their identity is might be tied up in the way that they make food. And so, being able to support that. So, I think first off, we see challenges with sequencing of activities like that, or grocery shopping, not being sure exactly what they're to buy or how to buy it, that sort of thing. And the swallowing, as I said, started from the beginning. Then we see other things in the middle stages, like eating challenges, using utensils, not sure what to do with the utensils, or maybe using the wrong utensils. Um, again, the inattention might get worse during the middle stages. So they might start eating and then stop because they're not sure what to do next, or they might lose attention with eating. In the later stages, we see people often requiring eating assistance. And so that can be a challenge for caregivers in the community, as well as when they're going into a home and supporting their loved one with eating. How can you do that in a way that is very personalized still and not a task? So that eating assistance, chewing, swallowing problems. By the later stages, sometimes folks aren't recognizing food either in the same way as they were earlier. So they might eat things that aren't actually food that are on the plate. They think like a napkin, for example. They can't really see it very well, perhaps. They pick it up and they might put it in their mouths. So there's a lot of challenges we see with eating, and certainly with dementia specifically.
It's multi-layered, isn't it? And it's
Yeah,
one thing I hadn't really considered is when I first thought about this concept, my mind immediately went to those later stages where you're fully needing assistance to eat. But there's so many stages to get to that along the way, and I'm assuming
exactly.
they all require a keen eye on the part of a caregiver to notice what is happening, and also relaying that to the medical professionals and of course the
Exactly.
nutrition professionals as well. Are there specific environmental or emotional factors? I mean, I can definitely see definitely the emotional ones that can exacerbate these challenges, and how can caregivers address those?
Yeah, so thinking about specifically in the earlier stages, the environment, making it as calm and simplified as possible. So, for example, if you have the radio on when you're cooking and the TV maybe is going on and you're trying to cook, that's a very noisy, perhaps, and complex environment. And perhaps the person's trying to help you and now they're getting distracted, right? So thinking about how can we remove distractions, keep it focused either on the cooking activity or the eating activity. Sometimes gentle music when you're eating is helpful, right? Because it keeps you sort of calm, etc. But not always. If it's too much going on, keep it calm, keep it undistracted. Thinking about other environmental things, good lighting. We all need good lighting, regardless of dementia or not. As we age, our eyes just don't work as well, and so good lighting in the kitchen and in the dining room to help people with eating. We think about using contrast. So if you have blue plates, for example, food might stand out better on those blue plates because they can be deciphered from versus a white plate. So having food with color in it compared to a white plate or using a different colored plate. Thinking about utensils too, that can be supportive. So someone wants to be involved in cooking, but their hand grip is challenged. With that, you might think about getting some tubing that goes over the end of the spoon to help them hold and grip the spoon and support that stirring. Many people want to be involved in cooking. It's a meaningful activity for the
Mhm.
family, right? To be involved in cooking, and the caregiver is doing it, and getting some help is a good thing. So, what can we do to actually make it a safe space? And so, thinking about what aspects the person has capacity to do, and if they want to do them, then giving them that support to do it. Everybody can participate in cooking, right? We can have you can stand at the do the dishes and wash the dishes. You can stir the pot. You can wash the vegetables, right? All those things are meaningful parts of making a meal. So those are some environmental things in the kitchen that we can do. Lighting, adapting the task, giving the opportunity to use their capacity to be part of cooking. Then eating, good lighting, contrast on the plate, giving it a calm, quiet environment often supports eating. When we think about the emotional factors, I think, you know, often I see caregivers. I'm a caregiver myself. My mother has dementia and long-term care. And you can get frustrated when you make something and the person doesn't eat it, right? And so I would say don't take it personally. Right then at that moment, that might not be what the person wants, even though they said, "Oh yes, we're making broccoli soup. Let's eat it together." And then when it gets time to eat the meal, they don't want it. Don't take that personally. Offer other things on the table that are easy to eat. Think about maybe things that are easy to pick up with your hands to eat that might actually support the person. But don't get emotionally tied up in that I've offered you food and you're rejecting it. And I think we often feel that. So just put that aside, try to put that aside and say, this is just how it is now, accept that. And then the person with dementia can get upset and frustrated and then not want to eat the meal or be part of the have a blow up when they're making the food with you and get really upset. I can remember one of my studies with a person saying, he might get angry, but then he forgets. And
Mhm.
that's okay. And so then just don't let that linger, right? So accept, give it up and don't worry about that, and give a bit of grace and don't and forgive that little episode of frustration and realize this is the disease, right? And people get frustrated. So that would be my advice around that as well.
I would also think that, you talked about when we're speaking about finding ways to adapt tasks in the kitchen, specifically
Mhm.
if it's a person that enjoys cooking and enjoys participating in that process,
Right.
that's also going to feed into the emotional experience and the
Absolutely.
overall wellness of the person that is being cared for because they're still being involved in the tasks that they
Exactly.
enjoy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'll give you an anecdote again from one of my studies. We had a woman in the study. She was an amazing cook, and she had dementia. And we followed this family forward in time. We had a study that went for 6 years, so you could see what happened over time. And the family knew the importance to her of cooking. Unfortunately, the daughter lived very close by. And so when it came to family meals that they ate together, they slowly transitioned the more complex tasks to the daughter, and the mother then took on other tasks. And so by the end of it, rather than doing the whole meal, vegetables were her thing and the roasted vegetables or whatever it was. And she took great pride then in I'm making this and this. And she'd work up, how she was going to do the recipe for that or whatever it was. But now the complex meal was no longer the issue,
Mm.
having to do that. And she felt still good though, because she was doing a key part of that. She was making these really amazing vegetables for the meal, right? So reinforcing that when person's capacity changes, they're still going to have a meaningful role if it is important to them to be part of cooking. Some people it's not,
Mm.
men perhaps, and some women who don't cook, it's not really important to them. But if maybe they want to be in the kitchen with the caregiver, maybe that's your together time, right?
Yeah.
You're chatting, and the person looks like they want to do something, then maybe give them an activity like, as I said, peeling potatoes, a repetitive activity that's gives a sense of accomplishment because you see it done, right? And they're part of the activity.
We talked about sort of at the beginning, the nutritional component of this and how important that is. What should caregivers prioritize when planning meals for their care
Yeah.
recipient? Are we looking at calories, protein, specific nutrients, all of the above? What do you suggest?
Well, it depends on the person, right? But first off, I think the key thing is we often, as older adults, we don't eat enough protein. And so you should have protein at every meal and preferably snack as well. And so it's not as much as we think, but about 20 grams. And so that would be, for example, a glass of milk at breakfast and maybe a piece of whole grain bread with a slice of cheese on it. That would get you to your 20 grams of protein. So you need to emphasize protein in our diet and lean-based proteins and animal-based, as well as plant-based proteins like soy and tofu, edamame, peas, etc., beans and lentils. So those are really important to have frequently throughout the day, preferably every meal and snacks if you can do that as well. The reason being, older adults don't actually use the protein we eat to keep our muscles as well as when we were younger. So even if you're exercising and you're not eating enough protein, that protein won't necessarily be used for your muscles the way you hope they are. You need more protein. It's about 50% more, actually. It's
Mm.
surprising. Then the other two key nutrients that I want to refer to are those we know the requirement is increased with age, calcium and vitamin D. And Canadians often don't get enough vitamin D in their diet for sure. They're not getting out in the sunshine without sunscreen for 15 minutes a day and not getting enough vitamin D. So we recommend that people take a 400 international unit vitamin D supplement over the age of 50 to support bone health as well as other key systems in the body. Calcium, it's being recommended that we consume 1,200 milligrams for people over the age of 50 that are female and men over the age of 71 that are male. But the issue is we prefer you to get that through diet. There
Mm.
is some concerns about calcium supplements can be too high that can affect other issues in the body. And so it's preferable to get your calcium if you can through your diet. But if you can't, and you're on osteoporotic medications, your doctor will often refer you to having more vitamin D and calcium as well. The last nutrient isn't so much an increase in requirement with age, but we often see older adults have a low amount of vitamin B12 in their body. And this is often a result of taking antacids or medications that
Mm.
reduce the acid in your stomach. And the B12 is bound to protein in our diet, so it needs that acid in the stomach to help its decoupling from the protein. And so if you don't have, or if you take these, various commercial or prescriptive antacids, that can lead to long-term a B12 deficiency. It's a very common challenge, and it actually has cognitive symptoms. So it's one thing to check for sure if you're taking a protein pump inhibitor or a beta blocker. These things can actually impact the acid in your stomach. So talk to your doctor, get your vitamin B12 checked. It's really easy to supplement and get that B12 back up where it should be. Then thinking about calories, it's really is the person underweight. And so often people, in their 50s, 60s, 70s typically aren't underweight. We tend to be on the other side of things. But as dementia progresses, people do lose weight. And so this is where you would want to have both energy dense and nutrient dense foods. So think about things like cheese, whole dairy products, so 3% milk, for example. Of course, you're getting some more saturated fat, but you're trying to deal with the issue that the weight loss is probably more likely to be of concern before a cardiovascular event at that point, right? Because that could lead to functional problems, loss of muscle, falling, ending up in
Mm.
hospital. So the malnutrition is more of a concern than the long-term effect perhaps in your heart, especially if these folks are often on hypertensive medications already and other things to control cardiovascular disease. So it's really, we want to avoid that malnutrition as well, weight loss.
We talked a little bit about that opportunity to find connection and wellness and that feeling of a meaningful community in the kitchen, in the cooking
Yeah,
process. But how can caregivers shift their mindset to see meal times overall as an
yeah.
opportunity for connection rather than just another caregiving task?
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, we do it 3 times a day, right? And if you're at home with your caregiver all day long, it seems like just going from one task to the next. But if you can think about meals as that slowed down time rather than rushing to the next thing, this is the quality time. You're face to face. You're eating together. Maybe you cook together as well. And it's an opportunity to slow down, de-stress, and just relax. And if we build enough time in our day to do that, it can really be rewarding. So this study where we were calling or following people for 6 years, this was a key component they talked about, that in the day of living with dementia and a caregiver, they saw it as a little oasis, quite frankly, in the day. But if you could sit down and just eat and enjoy good food, conversation, and go from there. And even if the person with dementia doesn't converse as much as they get progressing with their condition, often mealtime would be the only time they would connect verbally because it's such a social thing that we eat and talk together, right? And so I think it's making mindful choice. This is going to be a planned time that we're just going to relax together. That's the
Mm.
key thing. We're connecting is our first goal at this meal. And then second is obviously eating, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really about the idea of connecting. It's such a socially ingrained thing that we do, right? We eat together and share meals together. And it really is that emotional support that we all need.
Is there a specific case that you can think of where changing the mealtime environment or approach made a real measurable difference for someone?
Mhm. I'm actually thinking about one of the homes. So I do research in long-term care as well. And so one of the homes I have done some work in and supported them to make changes, they had a beautiful area specifically for persons with dementia in this home. And they were just so efficient at doing the meal. And they had enough staff that, unlike many long-term care homes, sometimes you don't have enough staff. They were in assisted living, so they actually had enough staff. And they had so many staff that they were just picking up dishes as soon as people finished the meal and doing things, very efficiently. And I said, listen, you got to slow down. They said,
Mm.
why? I said, well, because you're making people feel rushed. It's like when you're in a restaurant, if someone's hovering to take your plate, right? So that would be the key thing that I would think about for caregivers at home too, is don't rush it, extend that time, right? And so when in this home, what they ended up doing, they took my advice and they also put into place some other key changes, like, for example, keeping the dining room open all the time in this home. And before it had been closed off. And the food was brought up from the kitchen, and then the doors were open when it was all ready. And then people would rush in, eat their meal, and rush out again. And I came back a couple of years later and they'd taken the advice, and also they had some other advice about change the physical environment to have it more of a kitchen in that dining room with a staff member there 12 hours a day. And then they would work 3 days and then be off for 4 days, sort of thing. So now it felt like a home because there was always someone in the kitchen right? And that happened to be a team member. And people could come in, they could linger after dinner and have tea and coffee. Family could come in and make a tea or coffee. No longer was it like, oh, well, where do we go if we want to have a coffee in this place, right? It's right
Mm,
there. So that's what I would suggest in thinking about that specific case. It really showed how changing that physical environment to open, to being a place that's enjoyed. It's not just a place to eat, and which is very much like our homes, right?
yeah.
So that is one example. I'd like to give another example, though, of in a home, an environmental change that really changed something for people. And this is around connecting. And so I had a husband and wife, and she actually had a business still, and he obviously had dementia. And so during the day, he would not see her very much. And so during mealtime is when they came together. But his conversation was starting to change. And so what their family did, very, very smart thing, they decided to put anecdotes and stories together, and they put it in a fishbowl. And so every lunchtime, he would choose out an anecdote and they would talk about it. He might have listened more, but he heard about the story about his life with his family, and sometimes he would interject as well. And so it became this lovely tradition to support one, his identity of who he was in the past. They had this shared, dedicated time together at meals, and it was a way to stimulate conversation between the two of them as well. So that's, not as big a physical change if you think, but a very small sort of thing that can be done to think about how can we make this now this connecting point if a person is losing their language and losing conversation.
You can make a difference in the caregiver community by becoming a volunteer. The Ontario Caregiver Organization is dedicated to providing caregivers the resources needed to help them be successful in their caregiving journey. Becoming a volunteer means you can help support caregivers in a variety of different ways. You can join a working group, an online forum, a focus group, or provide peer support. Volunteers can make a huge difference in a caregiver's life. Become a volunteer today at ontariocaregiver.ca. Now, back to our episode. I love that idea. I really do love that idea. I think that's so important because it just doesn't make the meal feel like a more meaningful touch point in
Mhm.
certain, especially, and to stimulate that conversation. What are some ways that caregivers can involve their care recipient in mealtime preparation? I think we did talk about this a little
Yeah.
bit, even if they have physical or cognitive limitations. Is there
Yeah,
anything else that you would
I'll give
say?
you a few other examples. So thinking about cutting some vegetables can be hard, right?
Mm.
And so the caregiver can identify what components are a little bit easier. So peeling is easier if you use a peeler, right, rather than a knife. Um, So peeling carrots, peeling potatoes, that sort of thing. But often the first cut is the hardest. Like think about a carrot, for example. You want to cut it, lengthwise. That's the hardest cut. So the care partner did that and then left the smaller cuts to the person with dementia. Or similar, a pepper. You taking the head of the pepper and slicing it, vertically along its axis, and then you got two halves. Then it's much easier to cut. So those first cuts might be the way to start the process. Also thinking about just getting the person started. So once they get started at it, then they keep going, right? And then you don't have to monitor. Same thing with dishes, for example, washing the dishes, stirring a pot. Once the person gets started, then they might be just able to go and keep going ahead. Focus on their strengths. What do they do well, right? And don't worry about what they don't do well. What are the things that they do well? Maybe they like to set the table. Who cares if the fork and knife on the wrong side? It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
But they are part of the process, right? And think about even planning the meal, even if they're not cooking, can they be part of the decision making of what we're going to have? What would you like to have? And maybe let's talk about the recipe that we're going to make. Is it something your mom made in the past or something like that, right? So involving them in the activity, even if they're not necessarily hands-on in the activity.
When we're thinking about people that are care recipients, especially, but not exclusively older adults, there are often stages where sometimes there is care being provided in the home by a loved one, and then there may or may not be a transition into a congregate care setting. So when we look at that scenario, how can caregivers adapt meals for someone that is transitioning between
Mhm.
home care and this congregate care setting? Because
Yeah,
we're
I think,
going from something very familiar to
yeah.
something. less familiar or unfamiliar.
Well, and it's not only that, Michelle, but it's also the ability to individualize when you're at
Yeah,
home, right? And
right.
it's
Of
really
course.
hard to individualize in a congregate setting. If you now have got 32 people or so in the dining room, and they all have preferences, they have, time of day they eat, when they eat, where they eat, with whom they eat. There's all those preferences, right? How they like their toast. Is it lighter or darker, right? So
Yeah.
everything is a preference when it comes to
Yeah, of
food.
course.
And so how do you individualize that? And so I think for as a care partner, figuring out what's really important to the person living in with dementia in that setting now. So my mom from the rural areas, apple butter when my dad was alive, she and he would have apple butter on their toast every morning. And so for the first while, when she moved into her long-term care home, I made sure she had apple butter. And the staff were accommodating to say, okay, we just put her name on it and when it was opened and make sure it gets refrigerated after breakfast and we'll have it out for her breakfast for her, right? So I think identifying what are those key elements that are really important to the person's identity and feeling of connection with home that helps them to transition. That's really important. Unfortunately, meal times tend to be set at certain times. Now,
Yeah.
homes are trying to move away from that, and depending, like retirement homes are a little bit more generous with their time allocations. And it's certainly something I try to do. Run another program called Choice Plus, where we're trying to get mealtime experience improved for caregivers as well as residents in the home. And that's one of the areas, maybe it's lengthening the time of a meal so you don't have to feel rushed to get there, rushed to leave, that sort of thing. So I would suggest caregivers getting involved in the food council and the food family council as well, and talking about some of these things. Can some of these rules, if they feel like rules anyway, in the home, be modified to be a bit more individualized or tailorable for families because it's hugely important to the individual's identity, hugely important to their quality of life.
Mm.
So we need to think about that. And so that's some of the recommendation I make. Also eating with the older adults. So since COVID, we haven't been able to really eat dining rooms. At least with my mom, her
Yeah.
home doesn't have a room, first off. Secondly, and so I used to go in before COVID, we have a little meal together and they put us at a side table in the same dining room and I'd just pay my $10 for lunch, whatever. That no longer happens, unfortunately.
Mm.
But what I do is bring something with me so she doesn't feel awkward eating with me, right?
Right.
So she'll eat and we'll enjoy our meal together. We'll talk about what we're eating and she might offer me her pudding and I'll say, no, I've got my whatever. And we'll just keep on eating and that works out well. So bringing your own meal. I can remember as well, one of our studies, one of the families, the woman talked about how she would bring for a special meal, like anniversary meal, she'd come in and set up a table with a tablecloth in his room, and bring in a flower and a little
Yeah.
bit of wine and make it special.
Yeah.
So don't feel like this is not your home. Make it your home.
The Ontario Caregiver Organization has created a series of free webinars to help caregivers in their role. From financial planning for caregivers to mental health, these webinars provide support and resources to caregivers across the province on a wide range of topics. Our goal is to help ease the everyday stresses and challenges of being a caregiver. You're not alone. We're here for you. Register for an upcoming webinar today at ontariocaregiver.ca. This brings me back to my grandmother, who has since passed away, unfortunately, but where she lived, she did have there were different levels of assistance where she was living in her seniors, and she was quite independent, had a little kitchen in her room. It was more like sort of a studio apartment set up. So she'd make her own breakfast in the morning. She'd have her toast and tea and whatever she liked. And then there was a dining room, plus also a coffee room and a pub, for meal times later on in the day. And we'd come and have dinner or lunch with her on
Absolutely.
certain occasions. They do. But for her, I think, and there was some options in terms of what she could order as well,
Right.
which I think really appealed to her, because if she didn't want the soup, she could have the salad, and so on
Yeah.
and so on and so on. So that point you make about the individualization, she preferred to make her own breakfast. She
Yeah.
was able to do that. So I think that really gave her a good sense of overall well-being and autonomy. Autonomy is
Exactly.
that
Exactly.
thing that is so important to all of us, having that ability to be ourselves and have as much control as we can have. Um, it can be a stressful situation, especially when we're looking at advanced stages of dementia,
Right.
we want to make it less stressful, of course, when we're talking about mealtime. So, is there anything you can suggest in terms of a strategy to sort of make things work for the care recipient and the caregiver
Right.
in a better way?
So maybe start with if the person is living at home still and they
Okay,
have
yes.
advanced dementia. So I think for the caregiver, realizing the connection at the meal is probably the more important thing at this point in
Yeah.
time. If the person has a poor appetite or isn't eating well, that connection you build eating together if you're assisting a person. So it's the same with caregivers in long-term care or assisted living as well, that make eye contact, have conversation, even if the person doesn't respond, they're listening, right? And they
Mm.
feel important because they're being talked to and included. So, touching someone's arm and saying, I've got this amazing turkey pie. It came from that place that we used to go to. Do you remember? And here's a bite. Let's try that. So that rather than here, John, open your mouth, right?
Mm.
The first one is much more about us. It's about our connection. It's about how food brings us together. And the person feels important, right? It's not a task to be done. So keep that in mind. Don't make eating a task, make it a connection. And so rather than open your mouth, John, I've got that turkey pie. You remember when we used to go out to this place and we had turkey pie? I think this one's just as good. Let's try that, John. Right? So
Mm.
that's what I would suggest for the advanced dementia.
Yeah.
And secondly, too, you're going to see, though, swallowing and eating challenges with
Yes.
advanced dementia. If you're at home, get a referral to a dietitian or a speech pathologist if you can through home care to help. They've got some great strategies to help with texture modifications that will help with swallowing, make it less stressful for both you and the person that's eating. Um, Lots of great strategies that are out there that can be supportive to you. So really look into that and how to make it less stressful, like texture modifications, making
Mm.
things smoother. Drinks are often easier to eat than food as the dementia advances. So focusing in on those and leaning into those strategies. In long-term care, I would suggest be there, right? I hear so many of my friends who are about my age and they've got parents who are in long-term care and they talk about their mom or their dad doesn't know them anymore. They're just sort of there. And I think, but hey, if you went to assist them at a meal, they may not know it's you, but they probably know it's someone different than just a caregiver that is paid to be there. They
Hmm.
feel that connection. And so again, how do you make that connection? You don't have to have verbal response, but you can talk and you can make eye contact, you can smile, and you can take the time. And we know that from the work I've done in long-term care, when a family member assists a person with eating, they eat more, they take longer to eat, which is a good thing, right? They're taking more time with it and they eat more.
Mm.
So for at that advanced stage, again, if you can, as a caregiver, be there when you can. I know it's really stressful, especially for children that are still working. You can't be there all the time. But when you are there, use a meal to connect rather than just coming in, saying hello to mom and she doesn't respond and go away. Visit over a meal and take the time off the staff and assist her, and you'll realize there is a connection there.
There's a lot more at stake here than just the intake of macronutrients, right?
Absolutely.
There's a lot going on here. And that also includes, and I wanted to bring this back to the idea of, the caregiver taking care of themselves as well, while they're taking care of the care recipient and their own nutritional health and awareness. So there's research out of Finland that has demonstrated that older family caregivers are susceptible to insufficient dietary intake and malnutrition themselves as
Correct.
well. So, why is it important for caregivers to prioritize their own nutritional needs while caring for others? You got to put on your own oxygen mask first, right? It's that sort
Exactly.
of thing.
The same idea, right? If you don't have the energy and the capacity to support your care recipient because you're not having good nutrition, it's going to affect everything, right? So, and it's not just nutrition, it's exercise as well, getting enough sleep. So the whole well-being that you want for your care recipient, you also have to do. And you're so right. Put your oxygen on first before giving it to someone else. But you don't have to make it hard, right? Um, I'm the queen of simple in my house. Quite frankly, we often have very simple meals. I'm a dietitian, but hey, we'll have baked beans and toast and carrot sticks and a glass of milk. That's a meal, right? That's all you need, and that takes 5 minutes to make. The carrot
Mm,
sticks are already in the fridge. We make them probably 2 or 3 times a week. We cut up, 4 or 5 carrots, put them in a plastic container without water, and they stay pretty good for 2 or 3 days. Snap peas, whatever handheld sort of vegetable, we usually wash it and just put it in a container. It's there in the fridge, and it's ready to go whenever we're having something quick. We got this as a vegetable. Now we don't have to worry about cooking it. Frozen vegetables, super easy, right? They're already
yeah,
prepared. They're already cut. Use them. There's some good products that are pre-prepared, some from local producers, right? Look into those. I make a lasagna that seriously takes me 5 minutes to make. I buy the pre-cooked pasta noodles, right?
right,
I use soy protein in my the soy protein that looks like hamburger,
right.
cottage cheese, and then on the top just some mozzarella. Seriously, 5 minutes to make and throw it in the oven. So think simple. Think things that are going to do more than one meal. Things last in the fridge 2 or 3 days, as you well know. So cook, 2 or 3 times a week, and the rest of the week eat those leftovers. Absolutely. And then, eat out. It's not detrimental. Eating out gives everybody a break, right?
Yeah,
And if you're a
it's a
person with
treat.
dementia, exactly. And they get to, it's a stress reliever. Many of the times it's a stress reliever. Pick places that the person with dementia feels comfortable. Maybe it's a place where they can have handheld food, right? Pick
Mm.
those things that are really easy to eat. And maybe it's not as nutritious as you might have at home, but hey, you know what? You're working hard, and think about your own nutrition as well. But it's some of the things that the same ideas, eat enough protein, lots of fruits and vegetables and whole grains. Those are decisions you make in the grocery store, not at the time of cooking, right? So start there. Make a good grocery list of things that you know are healthy that can be prepared quickly, and think about dishes that last 2 or 3 days that you can either get tired of it, then freeze it, you got it for a day that's not working well.
And I think you already told us about sort of, we did an overview of some of the key nutrients for the older adults that we're talking about that are the care recipients.
Yeah.
Anything different in terms of what the caregiver needs for optimal health, or should we focus on those
It's
same things?
well, yeah,
Protein.
and so if the person's younger, let's say less than 50, Canada's Food Guide is a healthy
Mm,
diet, right? It's the Mediterranean diet is Canada's Food Guide. It's just more specific, right? Half of your plate vegetables and fruit, a quarter of your plate lean proteins that can be animal-based or plant-based proteins, and then a quarter of your plate is whole grains, right? And so think about having those three things at every meal. So breakfast. Maybe you have some homemade granola that you've made, so it's a little bit more nutritious and more nuts and stuff in there than you might buy in the grocery store, which has more oatmeal perhaps and sugar. Throw on some berries and some kefir, and there you go. There's breakfast with a homemade latte with um, just heat up the milk in the microwave and add some instant coffee to it. That's what I'll do. Seriously, I, as I said, I'm the queen of fast. And so think about, how you can still get good nutrition. You can get it pretty quickly. It doesn't
mhm.
have to be elaborate, right? And it is that Canada's Food Guide. Mediterranean diet is basic Canada's Food Guide, more specific. Extra virgin olive oil, more lentils and beans, etc. It's the same idea, right?
You've given us a lot of quick meal ideas already just in the last few minutes, and I love that. Do you have a strategy for making time to plan and prepare nutritious meals? Or, like you said, you're just the fan of like whatever, but you mentioned sort of cutting up the carrots ahead of time. So
Yeah.
do you meal plan in that way?
No, I
Or is
don't.
it just,
I
you
don't.
don't?
I'm
That's okay.
so
I love
terrible.
that. Neither do I.
But I'm sort of, as I
I,
say, the queen of what works is simple. Like my child's left the home. It's just my husband and I at this point in time, but we're both working. And so there's just a routine, these are meals that in the week we do, right?
yeah,
And usually Sunday I try to experiment with something different. Like I might make a lentil curry. Then that's
sure.
my lunch from Monday through Wednesday, right? We go to a church program on Wednesday night. It's usually a nice healthy meal and we get leftovers. So there you go.
Yeah.
But usually when I experiment it's the weekend, I have a bit more time to cook and I might try a new dish that I haven't made before, but usually it is something that has multiple portions so that we can use it during the week for sure. Yeah.
That's usually my strategy as well. Sunday's the day that I like cooking the most. I may or may not have a nice like glass of wine with while I
Yeah,
cook, take my time, and then I've got the stamina because I have the time and it's the
exactly.
weekend to sort of make extra for the week ahead. And but otherwise I don't really meal plan, and now I feel so much better about it. I feel
Oh yeah, I
validated
don't
by
meal
that.
plan at all.
You don't. Heather, it's been so wonderful to talk to you today for the show. any resource that you can suggest for, you mentioned Canada's Food Guide,
Sure.
anything else that you can suggest that people go to if they want, or if they're interested in your research or what you do, or just resources for people that want to know more about nutrition and caregiving?
Absolutely. And so there's going to be two websites that I want to refer you to. So one is called Dementia Wellness. If you just do that Google, you'll come to actually a program, several programs that I'm participating in with some other researchers at University of Waterloo around exercise and nutrition. One's Delight and one's Dream. The Dream program is actually meant for caregivers that are running congregate meal programs and things like that. So things to think about when you have persons with dementia in those programs. The other one, Delight, is actually an exercise program and nutrition part of it. But what's in there are some amazing fact sheets for people. If you have a poor appetite, what are some things you can do? If you have weight loss, what are some things you can do? It also talks about some of those nutritious things we want to focus in on that support our brain health. So that's called the Delight program. And you should be able to find it if you just Google dementia wellness and you'll get a website and then look for Delight. The second one would be the older adult nutrition screening.com. And that's my website. But look under there for older adult resources. And there's a tab. Then once you see there, you'll see there's like, I don't know, 20 or so 2-page fact sheets that you can print off. Again, about topics that are important for older adults, like weight loss, weight gain, poor appetite, eating enough protein, all those sorts of things. And so it gives you some basic guidance around that. We're working on some other resources right now, but they're not necessarily ready and on the website. So going to the RIA website, we often use that as a site for many of our things that I'm creating at the Schlegel UW Research Institute for Aging. And so that's another good site. We have nutrition disguise recipes there that are meant for basically putting more nutrition in your food. So we have an amazing lentil brownie that's really good. And it's better than the kidney bean one because lentils puree so much better than kidney beans do and have lots of nutrition in them as well. So those would be the things I would recommend for you.
Wonderful. Heather, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
It's
And
been
I know,
wonderful.
thank you. And I know our caregivers are going to find so much great information in our discussion. So we look forward to getting the feedback on that and hopefully talking to you again.
Sounds great, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can access more details about support services on our website, ontariocaregiver.ca. Until next time, I'm Michelle Jobin, and you have been listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. We hope you have a wonderful day.